of music. And it's my delight to be here with you today. And I'd like to hear just a little bit about, is everyone, not everyone here is clergy. So do we have any associates in ministry here? No. Clergy. Preaching to the choir. Everyone lifelong Lutheran? Lutheran recently? 10 years?
A little longer than that.
A little longer. Okay. All right.
Watch all straight.
Well, we are here to talk about worship as it relates to our culture in terms of contemporary worship and connecting with seekers through worship. That's something that our church in Charlotte has done in a major way, and it's something that I fought tooth and nail. This is a little bit about my background. Very traditional upbringing. I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Redeemer Lutheran Church, the third of 3 sons who were all very musical. I was the least talented, the youngest and the least, but I was always the tall one. Went to a Lutheran, it was a Missouri Synod Lutheran parochial school, and had music every morning in the classroom. Had chapel once a week on Thursday mornings, and just music was a huge part of our life. Both parents were very musical. Everyone played the piano in our house. Everyone better than I, like I said, and everyone played something else as well and sang. My mother was a Missouri Synod pastor daughter, and so very much entrenched in that whole thing. We had a hymnal in our home, and we sang hymns at the piano, very much that kind of a background. When I was in 2nd grade, I had been taking piano lessons for a couple of years, and my teacher said, "Mark, it's time you started playing for classroom devotions." And so I decided we're going to learn this hymn, and here it is. It was hymn 4 in the Lutheran hymnal, God Himself is Present. So you got the ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, lots of repetition. So I did that. I don't know how long we learned that hymn, a month probably. So we started singing that hymn. I played it every morning, and finally the kids on the playground came up to me at recess and said, "Mark, you got to learn another hymn." So I went to Mrs. Deutsch. Her name, how's that for a Lutheran parochial school? Mrs. Deutsch said, "Okay, let's learn When I Survey the Windless Cross. Key of F, only one flat." So she worked with me until I learned that. And so finally we were able to switch the hymn until the kids, of course, came up to me in the playground and said, "Mark, it's time for another hymn." So that began my progression. I was doing that every morning all the way through 3rd grade. I got to 4th grade and got done with Mrs. Deutsch. And I was on the playground, and Mrs. Deutsch came up to me and tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Mark, I've told your teacher, Mr. Tensmeyer, that you're going to be playing for classroom devotions every morning in his class." So it continued. I never got off the bench. A little later on that school year, Mrs. Deutsch came up to me, tap, tap, tap on the playground and said, "Mark, I've decided it's time to start taking organ lessons, and I've arranged for you to have, Ms. Schulke is going to teach you, you're going to come early to school, I'll talk to your parents, you're going to find the hidden key to the church, let yourself in, ride your bike here early, get here, start practicing, and you're going to start playing for chapel on Thursdays." I was like, so I followed this one, whatever Mrs. Deutsch said, I did. It was time. She kept saying, "It's time you did this, it's time you did that." So I got on the bench really on the organ in 4th grade, and I've never gotten off. So got a lifelong history of working with music in the church in terms of playing for people's song. When I got to college, I thought I'd have my time off. My brothers fought with my parents to go to church. I never fought. I was always involved, so I always went willingly. But when I got to college, I was going to take my time off. So I got there that first weekend to St. Thomas, Polish State University, and the Lutheran campus ministry was right across the street. My parents dropped me off the weekend before and said, "Look, there's the Lutheran campus ministry." I said, "Yeah, great." And thought, I'm going to have my time now. And so I went to, did not go to church that Sunday. I slept in, doggone it. I'd earned my right. I've been the good boy for all those years. And my parents called me that week and said, "We're bringing up the rest of your stuff this weekend. Would that be good?" I said, "That'd be wonderful." They said, "Good, you can take us to church and introduce us to the pastor." "How was worship today?" "Fine." I lied. I had never lied to my father. In the meantime, I went and did my research, and I found out what the names of the pastors were. There was 2 pastors. It was a tri-Lutheran endeavor. They had ALC, LCA at that time, as well as Missouri Synod each had a pastor at this chapel. So I found out their names, found out how many worship was. My parents came that following weekend, and we went to worship, and it was fabulous. Cool. All these kids thronging the place. You could hardly even shake the pastor's hand on the way in. Thank goodness. Could not expose my lie at this point. And went into the church. The worship was so compelling. It was wonderful. They were doing, I don't remember what it was. It was a setting by Daniel Moe, little pipe organ over in the corner, concrete floor, high wood walls, worship kind of in the round, pastor, fabulous sermon, lay readers read from among the congregation. It was just, I just thought I died and got to heaven, and my dad's elbowing me the whole time. Listen to the organ. And then they do announcements at the end of the worship service. And the pastor says, this is our organist last Sunday, and we're still looking for some candidates. If anyone knows, and my dad, I'm like, Dad, please. So if anyone would speak to me after worship, if you know somebody, we are really looking for someone that can do this. And so, of course, on the way out the door, my dad is like, this is my son, Mark, and Mark plays, blah, blah, blah. So I played for him. I had a job then in college, and I became the music director at St. Thomas Lutheran Church, where we did a variety of things. We did the Missouri Synod service. We did everything in that hymnal. We did everything in the service book and hymnal. We did a lot of the precursor to with one voice hymnal stuff. We did, there was a worship resource called CW2 that we did, and all kinds of stuff. And we did Chicago Folk Mass, guitars, drums, we did it all. I graduated with my degree in music therapy, went to we went to Hollywood, Florida, where I had a part-time job at my church as director of music at St. John's there. Ronald Reagan got in office in 1980. Budget cuts came through, and they told me at the state institution where I was working, music therapy jobs are going to be cut. My background is as a music therapist with a minor in organ performance. So my church knew that I was going to be looking for a job, and they said, good, why don't you go full-time with us? You can do some youth and Christian education work, and we'll make this a full-time job for you. So that happened in 1980, and I've been doing full-time ministry in the church since then. I served here in Columbia, over at West Columbia, Mount Tabor, and then I went to Lutheran Church of the Ascension, Savannah, Georgia. Very historical congregation. And now I've been at Christ Charlotte, and I've been there for 22 years. So that's kind of my whirlwind tour. Very, a lot of that traditional, but I guess I had to realize some of it was very eclectic and diverse in its background of the stuff that I did. Just a little bit about Christ Lutheran. Our traditional service looks probably very much like yours. There were vestments. It's our sanctuary. Here it is on Good Friday up in the balcony. You'll see there's a handbell choir there. There's the balcony instrumentalists are sitting there sideways. The organ is an organ very much like what's here at the seminary. It's entirely tracker. There's not a first person to pull a piston or anything. And the choir is over there. So that's pretty much how we look. Here we are on Christmas. Shot looking from the front of the church to the back. Very traditional. If I get anything conveyed to you today, it would be this. I think worship is the most important thing we exist to do with the church. I beat that drum long and hard at our church. If you beat that drum, I think a lot of other things fall into place. It sounds like a simple statement, but what does that mean? If worship is the most important thing we exist to do, that tends to mean that there's usually a hierarchy, right? A pyramid of priorities. And if something's at the top of the pyramid, what does that mean? Something else is lower on the pyramid, right? Which can make things unpopular because oftentimes we vie for power in the church and we struggle with who's in charge and such. But if worship is the most important thing that we exist to do as a church, that means that Christian education, perhaps, may not be as important in terms of if we have to make some hard decisions, which fire are we most going to fuel? I think if we have our priorities of worship right, the rest of it falls into place. it's biblical. This is something that we are, as you know, the Bible says, worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Oh, magnify the Lord with me and let us exalt his name together. Love the Lord with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Worship, our Lutheran confessions say, in the Augsburg Confession, the church is the assembly of all believers among whom the gospel is preached in its purity and the holy sacraments are administered according to the gospel. That's at the very foundation and core. Again, most of you as clergy, I'm preaching to the choir here. Article 7 also says, for the true unity of the church is enough to agree concerning the teaching of the gospel and the administration of the sacraments. It is not necessary that human traditions or ties and ceremonies instituted by people should be alike everywhere. It is, as Paul says, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all. That is to say, I think there is a place for varying styles of worship. Yes? It's constitutional force. The preamble to the ELCA congregation, or the Constitution, says, we, baptized members of the Church of Christ, responding in faith to the call of the Holy Spirit through the gospel, desiring to unite together, to preach the word, administer the sacraments, and carry out God's mission, do hereby. Then the rest of the Constitution unfolds. It talks about, fellowship. It talks about education. But number one, first and foremost, in front of it is this preamble. The ELCA Constitution states specifically to provide services of worship at which the Word of God is preached and the sacraments are administered. I'm not saying it's not important to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and educate our children. I'm saying that worship is the most important thing that we exist to do as a church. I truly believe that your average Joe or average Mary out there, when they're looking to connect with the church, they are, well, like it or not, they are church shopping. And they're going to come and see, and they're going to come, and what are they going to come and see? Worship. Most often they're going to come see that worship service, right? They very rarely does someone come, let me visit your wellness circle. That happens. A woman will invite a good friend to circle, and she'll get to know the people and enjoy the fellowship and feel a part of the group, and they gets invited to worship. Does that happen through the back door? Yes, it should. Absolutely. But the average person that's looking is going to now, they used to look in the yellow pages, right? Now they're going to look online, they're going to find out churches and what time your services are. You'll also list when your Sunday school is, but they're going to check out a service. That's what they're going to do. Of course, we've got something else going on here. George Barna, he's the real pollster of the church, on experiencing the presence of God in worship. He asked people, how much do you experience? Just that question, the presence of God in worship. 32%, never. Never? Really? Wow. 48, but this is even scarier. 48%. Once in the past year. I can think of once where I experienced the presence of God in worship. Wow. What does that say about worship or the state of worship in our church? The reality is, we've been really watching this since 2002, but 85% of all Protestant congregations are stagnant or declining. We know this, yes? You see our ELCA numbers like everybody else's. Let me go back to that. I have served on several of the hymnal committees of the church. I've served on the hymnal committee for With One Voice. I served on the hymnal committee for Worship and Praise, the contemporary book, and I've served on the committee for Evangelical Lutheran Worship. As part of those meetings, they have usually about 16 people sitting in a room, most recently in Chicago. And in Chicago, you've got them representing around this table, in this conference room, you've got people from, well, you've got some ELCA representatives, you've got the publishing house representative, you've got What's Going to Sell, you've got the ELCA statistician, talks about, they can tell you from all the parochial reports, what do people worship with in there, what's the primary book of worship in your congregation, how often do you celebrate communion in your congregation, what's your average attending worship, what's your benevolent giving, so they can tell you. So the statistician was sent in on most of our meetings to talk about what are people looking for? What are they doing? How many are worshiping with this? What settings of the liturgy do they use? Which do they not care for? And what's happening with our numbers? So I've heard for years and years and years that the Lutheran Church, of course, is declining. We're about neck and neck with, well, we're losing them less fast than the Episcopalians. We're losing them more slowly than the Methodists. It doesn't matter. Overall, I think we should be concerned that the membership is going down. Sir?
How do they define Protestant? Mainline Protestant?
Yes, non-Catholic.
I believe born again.
The born-agains are in that number.
Are they?
The born-agains are in that number, yes. Evangelicals are in that number. There's another number here I want to get to. This is the number of Americans who don't go to church has mushroomed from 39 million to 75 million since 1991. 39 to 75 million that don't go. Just since 1991. That represents more than 1/3 of the U.S. adult population and a 92% increase. People, as they're church shopping, are opting not to go. That's staggering. That's scary. So if you wonder why we're losing, there's a bunch of reasons we can look at, but we have to come to grips with this fact. I feel like, I know, we do traditional worship great at Christ Lutheran. I wish you could see it. Every time I talk, I'm pigeonholed in this category of talk about contemporary worship. When I was asked to be on the ELW task force, they told me, you will be the white Southern voice for contemporary worship on this. They told me what my pigeonhole was on that. So, I gave just as much input. The reason Jesus Loves Me is in ELW is me. I argued for the inclusion of that hymn and kept saying, why does every Sunday school teacher have to go to a Methodist hymnal to find this hymn when all of our Sunday schools are singing it, all of our children teach it, all of our teachers love it, and we think our kids should know it, and we have to go somewhere else? And they kept saying, but Mark, it's available in the Methodist hymnal. Why do we have to take up a page in the ELW? I said, because why does someone have to buy the other book to get what we're going to teach our children?
Are you responsible for fixing the tunes or something else? If you are, thank you.
I helped with a few. But my point is, though, I had a significant voice on shaping the traditional music as well as the contemporary. But I'm always pigeonholed in this contemporary thing. We've been doing it a long time at Christ Lutheran, and I'm going to give you a little window in that, and you can hear a little bit about our story. We had 5.2 million members in '88. Last Broker report came out 4.5. So if you're doubting that we're losing a mid-sized congregation each week. We're losing an Ebenezer, Columbia every week. Every week. That's how fast the blood is flowing.
Wow.
Every week. So imagine shutting the doors at Ebenezer, and then next week we'll do Incarnation, and then next week we'll do, and then next week, what are you going to choose? It's happening. And the mid-sized congregations are the ones that are shrinking the fastest. It's like when I was a kid growing up, I was fascinated with the Titanic. And I remember one of the stories that just really got me, and I will use this illustration for you. It's like we're on the decks of the Titanic, and when the ship first hit the ice, and I think, I don't remember if James Cameron showed this in the movie or not, but it's like, they hit the berg, it's dark at night, you couldn't see a thing because there was no moon. And chunks of ice falling are on the deck. And people are kicking the ice on the deck. Isn't this kind of fun? And was that a shudder? No. And we go back to kicking the ice on the deck, and we're having fun. And we think that the ship is status quo. Right? And how long does it take for you to really feel any kind of angle or something on a ship that large? As the water, and what's going on below the decks, is the water is gushing at a rate much like this, a mid-sized congregation a week. There were 16 holes below with watertight doors. Well, they never imagined that an iceberg would come along. The problem with the Titanic was it drift along the side, so it went through several compartments. And to save money, they took none of the walls in the compartments all the way up. So what you have is a ship that's like this, and the watertight chambers were like this. So the problem was the gash came along like this, and the water filled, and the water spilled, and the water spilled, and the water spilled, and the dominoes, and that's what took the ship. Bleeding but I feel like we're on the decks of the Titanic saying, well, it's not that bad. It's just an Ebenezer. It's just an incarnation. It's just a congregation week. My congregation's fine. Christ Lutheran Charlotte's doing good. I hope your congregation's doing fine. But the church overall is in trouble. Worship is the most important thing we exist to do as a church. If that's at the top of the pyramid, that means staffing dollars, that means budget decisions. You've been through the same crunch that we've been through the last 2 years. We had to cut staff. Did any of you have to cut staff? No?
Not
Yes? Yes? Did you cut worship staff? Did you cut people that were related to the worship thing? Did you cut other jobs?
Well, I haven't got raised in 2 years.
I didn't get a raise for 3, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If worship is the most important thing that we exist to do, I think it does make some decisions. When you're talking about your service times, I don't know how often you talk about that, or if you talk about that. We have, in my 22 years at Presbyterian, we've had 13 worship schedules. So you want to talk about worship? So we can do a whole talk on this. You want to talk about what concurrent services do? We have 2 different rooms. We have a traditional sanctuary and we have a spirit hall. So we can do concurrently. We can do them back to back. We've done that. We've done. You can do worship. If you've got, you can do concurrent. We can do traditional worship and Sunday school at 1 hour. We can do in the same. We've done it all. 13 schedules. Well, that has not always made the Christian education people the happiest. You want to do one Sunday school, and you have a hard time finding teachers for one Sunday school. What does that mean if you're going to do 2 Sunday schools? We said worship was the most important thing that we existed to do as a church, and Christian ed was going to have to bite the bullet and find the teachers for 2 Sunday schools. That didn't go down easily, quickly, or smoothly. We now have, in our 13th schedule, we have 1 Sunday school. So we have done everything all around the barn and come back and all that stuff. But again, if worship is the most important thing you exist to do as a church, I think it shapes some of your other congregation. Our contemporary worship uses basically to inform. We've got a gathering rite, the word, the meal, the sending. Now the way we do that is not always is not ELW. It's certainly not straight out of ELW. Contemporary worship, there may be 1 lesson read and not 3. At the gathering, we may not sing a Kyrie. We've got a contemporary. We've used contemporary worship with several different settings. If you want to talk about that, I can give you some information about that. We actually commissioned a setting by David Haas, complete liturgy setting. So if you're interested in that, from Kyrie, Gloria, Gospel Acclamation, the whole bit. We no longer do a Gospel Acclamation. We don't do a Kyrie and a Gloria. It's much more chorale style in that there's a couple songs for the gathering rite. Which take the place of Kyrie and Gloria, and we made substitutions like that. So contemporary worship looks like this. That's in another room. This is a gym. Some fabric hanging on the walls that looks the different seasons. You see on the top left, you see a green set of things for the Pentecost season. Then over the right, you can't really tell with the lights on in here, but it's purple and black for Lent. It's a shot from kind of off to the side, looking at the congregation. It's seated in the half round. Now, I thought this was a very bad idea. I was convinced this was a bad idea. When I first came there, David Meisenheimer was senior pastor, and David said, "Mark, I've decided we're going to do contemporary worship." I thought, "Oh, good Lord." Now, I just come from Ascension, Savannah, which was, hysterically historical. Founded in 1741, and And while I was there, we celebrated our 250th anniversary. I have Bach Cantata series, and it's stained glass and marble. If you've never been to Savannah, you should go. And when you go, you should look at the Church of the Ascension. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. What a fabulous ring. So I got here, and David says, we're going to do this. And I thought, oh, golly, I'm going to take off. So, we had meeting after meeting after meeting about this, and I was just convinced it was a bad idea. And David kept pushing me, and I stalled as long as I could. Well, I needed to find this, I needed to find that. And he said, worship's the most important thing that we exist to do as a church. I was like, yeah, I can buy that. I agree with that. And he said, we need to, he went to community, what's the church in Arizona? Community Church of Joy. And they were kind of pioneers in that whole field. And he had gone to worship there. And he said, we need to help people connect their everyday life, what they're seeing and hearing outside there, and connect that in worship so we will be seeker friendly. Those were all new words to me, and again, I thought it was a bad idea. I held him off as long as I could, and he, I probably held him off about 9 months. And I was looking, well, I need to find this, and I'm gonna need some drums, I'm gonna need, and he kept saying, I'll find the money. We'll make it happen. But we never pulled the trigger. So finally, I don't know if you know David Meisner, but he is 6'8". And when you shake his hand, shake my hand, please. His hand is like this. His hand is huge. It's like this. So he comes to my office, and he comes in there, and he's got his day runner, and says, hi. Well, first he walks in my office, and he closes the door. That's never a good sign. When the senior pastor comes in and closes the door. How you doing? And I'm like, I mentioned he's young. So he said, I'd like to talk some calendar stuff with you. I was like, that's great. And he said, I want to talk about contemporary worship and when we're going to actually start that. He said, now here we are, we just finished Easter. And I'm thinking, you're thinking, summer's probably not a great time to start this. I said, yeah, I agree with that. So then he says, well, let's look at September. I'm looking at September, and he says, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's rally day, and we've got to get the choirs going, and Sunday school going, and that's probably not a great time, is it? How's October for you? And he says, I know you're going to think about Reformation. We got a lot of choirs and do some special music, and busy time. It takes us to November, and Advent and All Saints, Thanksgiving, busy time of year. December, we won't even discuss December, because that's, December. January, I know what you're thinking about January. You got to restart everything after December. You have to kind of crank up the animal again. Look at February, will you? So I'm looking at February, and he's just standing over me, and he's, Transfiguration. I think we should invite some people to a new service there in Transfiguration. Now that would be, how many months from now? I'm thinking a music director of your caliber and skill ought to be able to marshal the resources, and I'm here at your beck and call to do what I need to do to make this happen. Let's start this service Transfiguration Sunday. So I sat there and nodded my head yes, and wrote down the date. We're going to start. I committed. That was probably it was the most intimidating thing I'd experienced in a while, but it was a good thing. I committed to starting the date. We didn't have it all figured out, and we started, and we learned a lot along the way. What I like about what we did was we didn't make it just a worship thing. If worship is the most important thing that we exist to do as a church, let's get some help. Let's invite some people to help us talk about this service. So David formed this whole committee. We called it a Calling in Christ. Double entendre with the name of Christ Lutheran, a Calling in Christ. And we brought in we rented a bank of 16 telephones and brought them into our fellowship hall. And we came up with a script like the Baptists and thought, let's call it dinner time, like the Baptists. And let's invite people to our church. Like the Baptists. Imagine that as Lutherans. Let's invite someone to church. So we came up with our shtick, our spiel, and script, and said, hi, I'm Mark, and I'm from Christ Lutheran Church. I'd like to tell you about my church. Click. If you got past the click, You know, we had the whole thing laid out there. I'd like to talk to you about it. And we're going to be starting, the bottom line was, if we got that far, was we were going to invite you to a service that we're going to be beginning, a contemporary service, casual, don't have to dress up, in a gym, and talking about our church. Can we send you some information? So what I appreciated about that was the support of the community coming together to make this happen. That Sunday, we asked for 100 people of our own to go to that service. 60 did from our church. But we had 85 from the community show. Later on, that same Easter vigil, Easter season for the Easter vigil service, we had 90 people that had not been baptized, get baptized at our Easter vigil. 90 people. Have you ever been part of something like that? I'm Lutheran. I grew up with a baby at a time, once a month at the font. But seeing moms and dads and kids and babies and all this stuff, and I was playing the music from the balcony, and I kept seeing everyone come forward, and come forward, and come forward, and come forward, and I was amazed about something must have happened. I don't know what happened with those phone calls, but you know, you get like it's a 2% return. That's not a bad number. I think that's lavishly throwing the seed. I think you throw the seed, and throw the seed, and throw it lavishly. And the harvest that we reaped was a 2% out of the calls that we made. I see a question. No?
Yeah. Good job. 2 of my 3 calls were in small towns. Third one was in Spartanburg, which is a small city.
Right.
50,000. My experience, limited as it was that this works better in cities than in small town situations, at least in the South, where very, very few people at least are going to admit they're non-churched.
Right.
And show up as a seeker.
Right.
Is that, you would probably have to go on hearsay.
Well,
Because I'm sure it works in Charlotte, Atlanta, Columbia.
yeah, I think absolutely the phone call thing. And we, you know, Charlotte is one of the most church cities per capita in the U.S. You know what number 1 is? Anyone know this? Las Vegas, Nevada. Most church per capita. It's not like you think. So in Charlotte, I mean, you know, we got a Catholic church right down the street from you, St. Gabe's, that years ago was 10,000 members. Well, now we have one on the South Side Church. We have 28,000 members. Catholics. 28,000. We've got a Baptist church that's 30-something. And the fastest growing church in the United States right now is Elevation Church. It's in my daughter's former high school in Charlotte, North Carolina. Elevation Church. I don't know if you can Google them. Stephen Furtick is the pastor there. You talk about contemporary worship. I've gone there twice. I mean, you get earplugs at the door, and he'll tell you, you don't like the music? There's your earplugs. I'm trying to appeal to your children, and boy, is he getting them. And the children are bringing their parents. So Charlotte is a very church city, to get what you're saying. And so people aren't going to admit, even in Charlotte. One of the big questions, it's a joke. In Charlotte, people say, when you're meeting someone at a cocktail party, where do you go to church? Absolutely. When I grew up in Colorado, you would never ask somebody where they went to church. I don't know where you grew up. Did you ask that question? Sure. Yeah, we did not out west. Out west, that's private. My wife grew up in Minnesota. She said never. She, grew up in a large Lutheran church, one of a gazillion large Lutheran churches in Wilmer, Minnesota. And she said, you respect someone's space and not invite them, absolutely. So the whole concept of inviting people to church is not Lutheran. Should be, but it's not. And I think whether you're a small town or a large town, and whether you do a phone call thing, or door-to-door or whatever, I think the parable of the sowing of the seed and the sowing it lavishly is the point of that story. There's got to be a way to get the word out. We are also in the Bible Belt, and they are not liturgical. They don't appreciate the Easter Vigil service like someone else might, Keep ignoring your question.
That's all right. Did you start a new service, or was this transforming one of the services you already had?
We started a new one.
Okay.
And so we started originally at, during the education hour. So we had 8:40, 8:30, and 11 o'clock, 2 services, traditional, Sunday school at 10. So we did it that hour at 10 at first. We had, like I said, 13 schedules. I can show you the progression of services and then a rationale, and we did it. The important thing there, I think, is that we tried different stuff. And we were as entrenched and traditional and buttoned up, and as you can imagine. And we did it so that people with Rally Day were expecting, okay, what's the schedule going to be this year? For a couple of years, it was a different schedule every Rally Day. One year, we actually changed it at Rally Day, and we changed it in January 1st. It wasn't working for those 4 months. We changed it in January. So I think you got, as traditional as it is, I understand church politics and church councils and worship and music committees. We are some of the most entrenched people that exist. But we moved and got them used to being moved. Because worship was the most important thing that we decided that we did.
Quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
In terms of, is there a fine line between contemporary worship and entertainment evangelism? And if so, how do you see that?
I think, I don't see it that way. If you were to experience contemporary worship at our church, we decided, and again, I thought this was the wrong way to go. I wanted to blend everything. And David said, no, I think that we're going to go this way. We've got to make a decision. I'm senior pastor, and I'm going to pull rank, and here's what we're going to do. I think when people go to traditional worship, they want to hear the organ, and the voice of the organ, and our established Lutheran choral literature, all the trappings that you would imagine in a traditional service. And he said, I think when they go to contemporary, they don't want to hear the organ. I think they want to hear something else. I think they want to hear what's on the radio. And as I toured around and visited other congregations, and I would say that's exactly right. So when you go to our contemporary service, you hear drums, there's piano, there's electric guitar, acoustic guitar, all those things that you're going to hear on the radio. The music, we made that decision that it was going to sound like that kind of music. Now, that kind of music doesn't have to have bad theology. We have the same Lutheran, the same Lutheran form is there. We have the same baptisms, we have the same communion, we have the same sermon that you're going to get at traditional worship, and I am working my tail off to find good contemporary music that speaks to the theme of the day as well. So, is it entertaining? I'd say the best traditional worship to today's culture should seem entertaining. We use that word. I think we in the church look at that word differently than those outside the church. I have the same people come to my church that come to your church that say, well, it was just boring. I didn't get anything out of it. And I want to say, but if you were a good Lutheran, you'd understand that liturgy means the work of the people, and you got to put something in. I know that. I know both sides of that argument. Right. So, is ours entertainment evangelism? No. It is absolutely as Lutheran as it can be, to the core. That's why they keep sticking me on these hymnal committees, because the head of worship at the ELC has come there several times and said, okay, this is a model for the church, and let's put your voice on this committee, but you've got something to say about it. But it's because of my traditional roots. I've come there, dragging the whole way and resisting and trying to make sure that what we do. So I don't think the voice of the instrument, a lot of people will ascribe saxophone in church, really? Doesn't that belong in the nightclub? Or they'll say, the drums, really, in church? Isn't that going to defile the Holy of Holies? Doesn't that kind of defile the sax? I don't think instruments have those kind of voices. I think we give them human attributes. We think of saxophone as church, or as nightclub, and we think of drums as whatever. I think it's an instrument. They've been using drums in Africa for a gazillion years. Percussive beat gets people stirred up. It stirs us emotionally.
So you're looking, if I hear you correctly, the line really truly comes in terms of theology and the music that blends with the theology that's being used,
Absolutely.
as opposed to the idea of just entertainment per se.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not.
That's the distinction that I hear. Is that right?
Absolutely. I am not there to entertain them.
Okay.
If they find it entertaining, with their definition of the word, okay, I'll accept that. There was questions for.
Yeah, I had one. A lot of the congregation, I guess, maybe it's just the congregations that I've seen. I've seen a lot of, not a whole lot of use of the word traditional, but more the term blended traditional, blended contemporary, blended this. Do you, what's your take on that?
I think it's softening the thing. I mean, are you gonna, I think David's right. Are you gonna hear organ, or are you gonna hear drums? The average pew sitter out there, a third of our people, we kind of poll our new member classes, and I get to go to those classes, so I see who's coming. A third are Catholic, former Catholics, Reformed Catholics. A third are Lutherans. A third are other. They are finding that, I've lost my point. Give me a question one more time.
Blended.
The blended. They are very much, across the board, they are very comfortable with those titles, contemporary, traditional. I asked them that, and I asked them where they're going to worship, which service first did they go to, and they stayed with that service. And that's how they're shopping. Traditional, I mean, what does the blended word do? It's like, well, I think it softens it for us as church leaders. It makes us feel okay about something. That, you know, is it going to be drums and guitars, or is it going to be organ?
I mean, I think in terms of hymns, I mean, I've seen services where, I mean, you're incorporating the newer praise type music along with the 16th century German stuff too.
Yeah.
I guess that's the.
Putting and that would have been my first choice. Would we have done it? The amalgamation of styles, if you will. Yeah.
I was at Pilgrim in Lexington, and we went through the same story.
Nancy, you guys came to see us.
Yeah, she's wonderful. She and Blended basically succeeds in ticking everybody off, especially once the two services are established. Because Mark's right. I mean, people either want guitars or they want organs, except for people like us. And the thing is, the contemporary worship, it's not for us. And that was the biggest sell when we were at Pilgrim, is we had to remind the folks who were there and entrenched, look, this service isn't for you. It's for the people who aren't you. And the truth is, even in small towns, with the numbers of churches these days, if we all reached out, there's enough people in these towns to fill up every church. And none of them are. And so, you know, that was the biggest hurdle for the people who were entrenched traditional. They felt like they were being threatened because their worship was going to be taken away from them. But that wasn't the case. And if you blend their service, then they're going to know that their service is taken away from them.
I think you're exactly right. I couldn't say that better.
Isn't it? You can decide, you can use the basic liturgical outline. I think a target audience. I mean, you could go for rap service, you go Southern gospel, bluegrass, and still have that liturgical integrity.
Exactly. You know, if you want to pick, anybody know what the oldest hymn is in the PLW? You want to take it? It's chant.
Come Holy Spirit. That one?
Older than that is one other one. Advent. I'll come up with Emmanuel. Yes. Oldest hymn. You know, I love services with a theme. You know, I could do a whole service of chant. I could do a whole service of Norwegian, Scandinavian. You know, by Holy Wings and Children of the Heavenly Father, and I mean all that kind of stuff. I think something that someone ought to tap into is country. You want to know what the fastest growing demographic for radio stations is? Country. More people sell country than I mean, carry on, huge.
They are doing that in Texas, and it is
Yeah.
very successful. They
Yeah.
have Saturday evening services in
Yeah.
their country.
Right. You know, the story is told, you know, Luther with Almighty Fortress. When you do research that tune was not a sacred tune. At that point, the tunes in the hymnal were mostly done by Palestrina. Palestrina did not write Ein Festibert. They could have been a country hit by Carrie Underwood, sung in the bar, taken, and you're teaching them good Lutheran theology. I mean, is there a better hymn text than Ein Festibert? A great text, you know. When you look at the top 10 hymns, most requested, Mighty Fortress is always in the top 5, usually in the top 3. Holy, Holy, Holy is always in there. You know, and you do the same thing with contemporary, where the top 10 most requested, most used, etc. All those statistics. But
Which begs the question, you know, in 20 years or much less 50 years, what's contemporary now is not going to be contemporary. Right?
exactly. Well, and you know, and a lot of these hymns also have fallen from use. There was a whole season when I Survey the One Was Crossed fell off the map. It was too emotional. It was too personal. Think about the text. I. And we as Lutherans actually shunned that. It almost didn't make it into the predecessor to SBH because of the I language. You know, but so hymns do have a cycle. They have a like, you know, we sing a mighty chorus at Christ in the traditional, and we sing it in contemporary. It doesn't sound the same. We accompany it with drums, guitars, and it's moving and rocking, you know. But we sing that hymn. It's got a very different sound though. So I think it's possible to even take those same hymns and use them in worship. So that kind of speaks to your blended question. Someone that's a flaming contemporary, like this new church Elevation in our own backyard, they're never going to sing a mighty fortress at their service. It is absolutely the music has been written probably that week. We've got a band, and you can see that ours is more, you know, traditional musician. You can call it blended. You can see over to the right there, you know, got a category, 20 singers maybe there that day. You know.
Well, when you do your service, excuse me, sorry, not to cut you off here, but when you do the contemporary service, why did you choose to do it in your gym or facility as opposed to in the sanctuary?
Because we felt that the stereotype in Charlotte, North Carolina, was going to be opposed to saxophones and drums defiling the room.
There's your political aspect.
Because I'm looking at a picture, I noticed your presentation, I see pictures, okay, yeah, there's the cross, there's the altar, there's garments, okay, so I'm not sure.
Yeah. Absolutely, because we felt that the stereotype for the congregation would be opposed to
Didn't want to alienate the base.
didn't want to alienate the base. So I came here to speak to Ebenezer about their contemporary service at Ebenezer. They currently doing it in their chapel. Have you seen the chapel at Ebenezer? Very white, very historic, plain open. And then you go inside Ebenezer and it's stone and Gothic. And I wouldn't attempt contemporary worship in that space. I think the drums are not going to sound good. The organ sounds fabulous.
I suppose it's a lot of what we used to. I just know with my own history. I'm used to, I think my parents' church, when was the last time I stepped foot in what's called a traditional church architecture. A lot of the churches that I've been a part of have been more modern,
Right.
not in the 60s and 70s.
And that's great. If your place is flexible and can accommodate that, that's great. But we really were very traditional, and it was absolutely going to alienate our base.
I understand the principle, you know, that blending doesn't please anybody. But in doing interims, especially conflicted situations, and the attendance has been greatly reduced, so that you're talking about 100 or less in worship, and day is 300. You really can't afford the luxury of 2 services.
Right.
Is blended the way to get into contemporary worship?
I think that would be a great first step. Absolutely. I think I understand it's always a frightening thing to divide the body. I think the minute you take a congregation that's worshiping in one service and talk about dividing into 2 services, we are scared. We're scared of what the room's going to look like and feel like. I mean, you've all preached to rooms, I'm sure, or worshiping rooms where it's a 3rd full or a 4th full, and you're like, and you can't help but be affected by it. I mean, should we? No. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there we are. But absolutely, the statistics will always prove, though, the minute you divide, you will increase your overall worship attendance. Even though the services are going to feel smaller and not have the emotional feel that we might want them to have or enjoy, It always
And
increases.
that's our streets in Spartanburg, we're talking about 1,000 place there.
Could you try a Saturday night contemporary service? Could you try Sunday evening, early evening, and try a contemporary service that way? I think one of the big faults that people make is they'll throw contemporary in as let's do this the fifth Sunday of the month. Do you think people really keep track of our schedule of the fifth Sunday of the month? I mean, that's not how today's world works. It just doesn't. So we decided we would make some definitions. So traditional worship, we define that as the organ or / piano led. It would have the presence of a choir and a cantor to lead that service. That it would sound similar to what you're going to hear on your favorite classical radio station. The music of Bach, Haydn, Handel, Carl Shaw, Don Massaro, other giants in the Lutheran Church. Our contemporary worship service was going to be guitar and percussion driven. It was going to sound, it was going to have the presence of a leader, a key vocalist, soloist, and that's how I started at the beginning. It was just 3 people. And then it would sound more like what's on your favorite contemporary Christian radio station. People will always tell me, yeah, but I don't have a favorite Christian contemporary radio station. I don't listen to that stuff. I started listening to it. I didn't listen to it either. The classical station was on my preset. But I started listening for what was a good text. The music of Casting Crowns would be someone you should look at. The music of Chris Rice would be someone you should listen to. The music of FFH, the good, great Lutheran theology in those tunes.
Mark, I just want to say to that, one of the coolest things for me, and I come from not only a traditional background, but my father, I think, sleeps in a cleric. Being able to ride down the road with my children, hearing songs from church on the radio, reestablishing what they hear in church is, it is, and that's something that can't be traded. Because then we sing that in church, and it carries out into the world too.
Now, it'd be great if the other services were broadcast and you were able to sing those songs with your kids too, you could argue. But yeah, your kids are they're listening to it. So contemporary Christian is like the second highest growing or fastest growing radio demographic. Country music was number 1. Contemporary Christian is number 2. How we got where we were, we acknowledged and we mandated that worship was primary for us. We did not make contemporary worship a stepchild. We decided that worship was, if it was going to be at a prime time. And so prime time for us was Sunday morning. We validated people's worship style preferences, trying to not take them off by going in and saying this is traditional, this is contemporary. This meets in this room, this meets in that room, this time, that time. Any time a church goes to more than one service, I think that's good economics. I think it's good stewardship. Here we have a room. Think of your sanctuary. How much money is in the upfitting of that room? The pews, the organ, the instruments, the accoutrements, the altarware. We should use that room for more than 1 hour on a Sunday morning. That's just good stewardship. Versus how often do you use your fellowship hall? How often do you use your classrooms? How often do you use the parlor? There's rooms that you use for multiple uses and set them up, take the tables down and put them up. It's nice to use that one room that's got all the money in it. Let's use it for more than one thing. And if you're blessed with a room like you were talking about, that's not so defined, that's a real blessing. We made the conscious decision to avoid alienation and thereby avoiding worship boards. That's what we were talking about. We didn't want to alienate the bass by putting drums and saxophone. When we started this in 1991, guess who the big saxophonist was to hit the scene? Kenny G. Remember the music of Kenny G? Yeah. So that's why we did the saxophone thing in that. That's why I did that. We allocated appropriate budget and staff. So when David was saying, you got to start the service, he said, well, I need some money. Well, what do you need money for? Well, I'm going to need $2,000 for a soundboard, and I'm going to need $1,400 for a synthesizer, and I'm going to need, I don't know how much money I need for drums, but I'm going to need money for drums. I was just pulling this stuff. I was just wildly grasping at straws that I thought would all be roadblocks. But it was true. We did need to, and so, a couple of those gifts came from memorials. A couple of them came from just begging friends and people involved in ministry to contribute. Yes?
Along those lines, what has been kind of the paid staff versus volunteer musician dynamic throughout those years? 'Cause
I am paid, I'm full-time, and then I have,
I'm thinking more like a praise band with a
right,
drummer.
no one in the band is paid, not a single person. I have an associate that is paid 18 hours a week, and she plays in the band, so she would receive, that's part of her job. But, you know, that's it in terms of pay. This started very small. I demanded and expected excellence, and of course, you know that leadership comes from the top. If you ask for that, look for that, that's what you attract. We have 2 traditional services. What we were then, when we started, we had 2 traditional services. Sunday school, we averaged 400 a week. Now we have a traditional service, 2 contemporary services, we average 1,100 a week. 13 worship schedules, and I need to update this in 22 years. Here's what our schedule currently looks like. So you see that there's a concurrent there at 10 o'clock.
I gotta ask, 8:45 traditional worship, how many folks have come to the worship committee where you serve and say, why 8:45, why not later?
For us, when we first started with the 8:30 traditional and 11 o'clock traditional, our 8:30 service was always the strong one. Our 11 o'clock was always the weaker of the 2 services. So for us to make that at 8:45, they appreciated that it was 15 minutes later, and it was always our strongest traditional service.
I asked the
We
question.
have a lot of kids, and so they were up earlier, and we're also a lot of, we're young. Our average age is 32, mean age. It's
My
32.
whole congregation is going through a situation right now, we're trying to figure out, okay, well, if we do traditional here, we do contemporary here, okay, at what time do we do each? And nobody wants the 8:30 time slot. They want the 11 o'clock time slot.
Absolutely. So we lucked into that.
Yeah.
So we truly lucked into that because of our 8:30 was the strongest. We're built hopefully in plans to build a new sanctuary. We got to break ground this next January, and we're hopeful to go to a 2-service format. And we are just convinced that our first service has to have a 9 in it and not start with 8. I think it's shifting, and it's shifted to later. I think families are so pushed. We got a lot of families, and they're like, I hustle and do this every morning. Sunday I want to just pull it back a little bit. And we love that first number to have a 9. Start with 9.
When did you switch from 2 traditional to 2 contemporary, and what kind of conversations led to that?
It was the growth at the 1 contemporary in terms of numbers, and we wanted to divide that and see if, and prove the principle that if you divide it, it'll increase, and it did. We did that probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago. It had grown to the point that it was time to divide it into 2. Yes?
Yeah, because our problem right now is we have 2 traditional, and so if we think about turning one into a contemporary, that's when you start alienating your base.
That's much harder. What you could consider doing is do one of those concurrent. So 11 o'clock, you can do traditional, 11 o'clock, you can do contemporary. If you have a second room that you can hold concurrent in, and you can accommodate the preaching. Maybe the preaching pastor, maybe the sermon is earlier in the traditional service and later, so they can preach both places, or you have an associate, if you have an associate or lay person preach. So the big demands are musically, how am I going to staff the service musically, and do I have another room I can do it in, and how do I do the worship leadership in terms of preaching the word.
I think it depends a lot on where you are. I now belong to one of these congregations, it goes back to the 1740s, and for 250 years, they were a country church. Last 15 years, they've doubled in size. Former pastor had the contemporary service at 8:30, the traditional service at 11 o'clock. Where do you think all these newcomers, when do they worship? 11 o'clock, right? And the traditionalists, some farmers still,
Right.
they get up and daylight all their lives. This is my mother-in-law's generation, you know.
Right.
They all come to what was then the contemporary service. Thankfully, has switched it back. Now, in Spartanburg, again, you know, we had contemporary service at 11 a.m. and concurrent traditional service at 11 a.m., but in different buildings.
That's great. One thing I've discovered over these years of doing this is that the more contemporary I make it, the more guitar it is. I have never alienated the contemporary thing, congregation, if you will. That is never, it's never been too much in terms of the sound of how prominent the drums are in the song or whatever. That's never the issue. If people are going to give us feedback or comments on the message or or whatever, it's never been, like times, people will worship a lot by times. But in terms of the style, it's never been what I thought it would be. And I would think that the younger people would be going to contemporary, and the older people stereotypically would be going to traditional. You should see the gray hair that's at contemporary. We can't put people in these boxes. You know, a lot of those people were my parents' generation, and they grew up in the 40s. They grew up hearing big band. You know, I grew up hearing my parents' records. You know, and Benny Goodman and everybody else in my house. And I love the big brass section of the whole bit. So the more I do anything like that, I am not alienating that base. Absolutely. So it's just not what I thought it was going to be. Along the way, I tripped on this. When I came to Christ, there was 3 choirs: a traditional choir, a children's choir, and a hymnal choir. There are now, I don't know, something like 24, 26 choirs and arts ensembles, liturgical dance, drama, children's choirs all the way down to age 3. So I kept adding a choir. So I added the 3s and 4s, and then I added as they aged up, I added the 1st and 2nd grade, and I kept doing that until I got to middle school. And I stopped at middle school, and then it was like senior high. I just, you know, couldn't imagine doing it. And I had one parent who said, "Mark, what are you going to do when your daughter reaches this age? She's grown up in this church. We need to have a children's choir or a choir for senior high school." And I was like, "Oh, man, yeah, I know what you're saying." But I didn't want to do it. It would take a lot of energy. And so I fought that one and dragged my leg on that one and formed this group. We've sung at Pilgrim. It's called The Experience, and it's a senior high school choir. I started with 12 kids the first year. This year, the problem is I have 96 kids. And so as I'm going on tour, and I'm dialing these churches right now, I'm calling these pastors, we're going to New York. And what do you think I'm getting from this, what I'm calling? Because that's how many buses? That's 2 buses of kids. And did I mention there's 10 adults chaperoning? So it's really 106 people trying to find housing for a church that will say yes. It's a fabulous program. A fabulous problem to have. The thing is, these kids don't know it's not cool to invite your friends to church. These kids never got that Lutheran memo that says, you know, just respect someone's space, do the Midwestern thing, and what works, don't rock your boat. I mean, you know. So these kids invite their friends to church. I've got, out of those, I've had as many as, 15 to 20 that are not members of our church that are coming. And then you know what's happening? The kids bring their parents. Parents are very moved. One of the ways Elevation is the fastest growing church in the nation right now is growing. I mentioned they're worshiping my daughter's former high school. They're getting the kids. They're getting the kids, and the kids are bringing the parents. Parents today, we've grown up pampering our kids. We have worshiped them at the soccer field. We have worshiped them at all their programs. We have a lot of the praises on them. Every child's a winner. We've encouraged and loved and coddled and cajoled our children and indulged them to the nth degree. So when our kids lead us to church or go to church and they want to go there, we're like, "I'll go to church with you. Sure, I'll go see that." So families that we have lost because we're not contemporary enough that have gone to Elevation will tell us, "I'm going because of Stephanie. Stephanie loves it. My kid wants to go to church. Man, I'm going with her." Remember the first part of my story when I wanted to check out because I'd grown up in the church and I got to college? Well, that's not a unique unique story. Most of our kids grow up that way when they're done in confirmation. You look at your demographics, that's where we're really losing people, is right after confirmation. Then they're done. The parents are done. When they get to be my age and they're empty nesters, boy, I think we're really vulnerable. That's where our demographics start taking a little dive. Check out yours. The parents in their 50s, got some expendable income, got more time. Not so much, church. I can do something else this morning. So this thing now is the experience is helping to drive the whole worship thing for us. These kids are playing in my band. They're coming and they're saying, can we sing this song? Can we sing this song off the radio? These kids are choosing to listen to Christian radio stuff on their radio stations in their cars. Really? So I can listen to the rapper and talk about these horrible things I'm going to do to women, and if you listen to some rap music that's just like horrible, my kid could be listening to that, or they could be listening to, it may not be my choice of music, but if it's got a Christian message, I'd far prefer them to do that. Well, these kids are helping to fuel that whole worship thing. So I thought I'd include that. That was just something I tripped on that has really helped fuel our overall worship life as well. I'm supposed to leave room for more questions, so this might be a good spot to do that.
We have talked about some of the bands as far as places you go for music, Pastor Crown's, others. Resources, I guess, is what I'm struggling with identifying.
I will listen to something on the radio, or someone will sit. I've got someone that is in her car for her job, so I'll get this text. Our God, Chris Rice. So she's texting that, and so I'll go to iTunes and I'll download for 99 cents Our God by Chris Tomlin, and then I go to musicnotes.com and I can buy the arrangement for $4.99 of Our God. I might need to pen in or handwrite in some of the harmonies that they most often give you. Well, you get the piano part, the guitar cymbals above, the vocal line, and I might need to pencil in the harmony and listen to the recording and figure out what the harmony is and write that in. And I have the right to reproduce that. That is the quickest and easiest way. That's letting the radio be your guide. If you don't want to let the radio be your guide, we have several Lutheran resources that we published for this. Choosing contemporary worship, it's choosing something. You can look at that. Sundays and Seasons, do you subscribe to Sundays and Seasons online? There is the contemporary offerings that are there. Email me, I will give you some stuff. My email is Glaeser, Glaeser, @ChristELCA.org. mglazer@ChristELCA.org. And I'd be glad to give you some resources. Just yesterday, I had someone in South Dakota, a music director friend, say, hey, where are you finding the music? And send me just some lists. So I keep everything in Excel spreadsheets. So I just sent him, here's what I use for gathering music. Here's what I use for, so instead of a prelude, an organ prelude, the band is singing something. So I call that gathering music. Here's what I use for, I told you I use 2 songs for a medley at the beginning. Here's a list of those songs. So I've got all that. I can send to you if you wanted that. A couple subscriptions that are helpful would be leaderssongdiscovery.com. leaderssongdiscovery.com.
That's leaders.
Yes. No, I think it's Leader Song. Sorry, you're right. It's Leader Song Discovery. If you have a CCLI copyright license, it's a resource that comes along with that, and they send you a CD about every 2 months, and they compile what's happening in Christian music, contemporary stuff, and you look on the back of the CD. This is by Maranatha Praise Band. You can write them or check out their website. It gives you information on that. Key of G, a song, confessional in nature, appropriate for the Lenten season. They give you some little crib notes about it as well. That's a helpful resource. We also subscribe to the Word Music Choral Club, and I've gotten a lot of stuff from them. I get a lot of stuff for my youth and teens from Brentwood Benson Choral Club. Brentwood, as in Brentwood, Tennessee, BrentwoodBenson.com. And there's an arranger that does a lot of stuff. His name is, I was telling him, Chris, can't think of his name. I can email you that too. But just a lot of great stuff that's contemporary Christian off the radio, done well for band and a vocal choir, maybe 3-part or 4-part stuff. So
Are you gonna be around later today, or are you heading back?
I've got to go. My daughter is graduating today from UPenn with a master's degree in education. So Sandra talked me into coming down here to do this, and then I've got to get on the road. But I can stand around for a few minutes. Yes.
I gotta go to the chapel, so, but I'll email you. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
I have a question about the 3 leaders that you started with in 19.
I started with piano or synthesizer, electric keyboard, if you will, guitar, and voice. Started small, had a small little 4-channel amp. Outgrew that, bought an 8-channel amp. And then I went from there, I went to go see Hanson at Prince of Peace in Burnsville, Minnesota. And I saw all of his wires and music stands and stuff. And said, ooh, you could do this bigger, and decided, okay, I'd add a quartet of singers. So I had a soprano, alto, tenor, bass, added guitar, added electric guitar and bass then. I went from that to bass guitar and then drums. So I kind of went to those within a year. The first year we were about at 8 pieces. So the one thing that really is going to make it sound contemporary is the drums. The minute you do drums, you got to mic your singers to get the singers over the sound of the drums. So now you're looking at a sound person, a volunteer, and a bigger amplification problem, issue, money, that whole set of stuff. But I went from a quartet of singers to a double quartet, gave myself some flexibility, 2 sopranos, 2 altos, and grew it from there. And now it's, I've got a slide, it's this now. I'm gonna have to just get that slide up, starts the next one. There it was. Start small, but add this order: acoustic guitar and keyboard. Then I would add your vocalists, or vocalists, percussion, or right away to drums. Percussion meant meaning more congas, bongos. That seems to be okay to get into the church. People kind of accept that if you were really fighting that traditional element. Soundboard personnel, because you got to get the sound over that. Bass, a descanting instrument like the soprano saxophone, or synthesizer, and then other percussion instruments. Here's where to find some musicians. I can email you this presentation as well.
Yes.
Great. Here's what we have now. Bass guitar, starting at the bottom, acoustic guitar. That drives the sound. If I had nothing else, I'd have an acoustic guitar. It's got to be a good player. They got to have that. Think of the music of John Denver. That driving guitar that's in John Denver's music. That kind of guitar will help drive this, will sound contemporary. Electric guitar for all the little electronic riffs. I use electronic drums that are easier to control. It's easier to get them in the sound and not be so loud. Percussion, acoustic grand piano, we have 2 synthesizers, a soprano / tenor sax player, 24 vocalists that divide between 2 services, and 3 sound technicians. That's what we've grown to. So,
Your email address again was
M. Mark Glaeser
right.
at ChristELC.org.
Okay. And you can email
But
us.
it's lowercase, yes.
We've started around.
Should I email you this presentation? Absolutely. Glad to.
We started around a sheet that we're gonna put emails on. Can we
Okay.
hand that to you on the way out?
Sure.
I'll take it and get it to them. I know him.
I've known Sanj for a good long while.
And you two are the ones who call me Sarah.
Thank you for your attention, for your questions, and appreciate you listening. Thank you very much.